Really great to see you here, and you should know that we have 3,500 people online as well. So on behalf of the coordinating partners, that's CIFOR, it's the UN Environment, it's the World Bank, IFPRI, the Food Policy Research Institute, CIAT, the Center for International Tropical Agriculture, the Water, Land and Ecosystem Programme, and Credit Suisse, as well as donors including UKAID, the Australian government, and Finance in Motion, and all the session hosts. Many organizations are contributing to this event. You're all very welcome. I want to give special thanks to the CIFOR team that has worked hard over the past months, and a special acknowledgements to Kamal, our captain on the ground, who makes all this happen. It's amazing every time. So from there, landscapes. Landscapes are often portrayed as problem areas. Deforestation, degradation, loss of biodiversity, planetary boundaries, not enough food, not enough water, too much water, greenhouse gas emissions. We need to turn that around and see landscapes as opportunities for livelihoods and for well-being for billions of people. Think hundreds of millions of smallholder farmers and their businesses. Think of all the important value chains of renewable products that begin in landscapes. Think of the planet we want to leave to our children. We have great expectations on our landscapes. Meeting most of the SDGs depends on what happens in the world's landscapes and how we can support people in managing them. Take finance, for example. Unless we can unleash the muscle of the private finance sector to also scale up investments on millions of farms, how can we expect sustainable solutions to appear at scale? Landscapes are places of many kinds. Large and small, tropical and boreal, variety of agriculture and forestry practices, ecosystems of all kinds. We want to embrace this diversity. We also need to embrace that landscapes are dynamic, and they change much more over time than we think. We need to avoid, therefore, top-down, single agenda, fixed solutions. But at the same time, landscapes have many similarities. There are also spaces where different values come together, and that's true for all landscapes. And here it's important to note that there is a space here for landscapes that is not only about policy measures, it's not only about economic measures. It's about a lot of values that go beyond that. It's about individuals, it's about families, it's about community values, it's about faith-based values, it's about historical, cultural traditions. All of that are values that go into landscapes, and they need to be dealt with. This is what the landscape approach is about. People bringing their value propositions to the table and figuring out what the best way forward is, whether the landscape is a country or a farm or anything in between. And this is also what the Landscapes Forum is about, supporting people and landscapes, supporting learning and exchange, bringing experience and knowledge, working with the common denominators between landscapes. That's not to say that they are similar, they are very diverse, but they have some common denominators. And figuring out how to generalize those denominators without prescribing solutions. The most important of those things, in my view, is how do we define and measure progress? There are hundreds of ways of doing this. And there are thousands of methodologies. There are tens of thousands of indicators. We don't have a general way to do this, and that's one of the most crucial factors if we want to have consensus at higher levels that we're making progress, and if we want to make that scaled up finance to actually work. And maybe most importantly, following various elections, etc., reaching out to all those people who want to know more and want to be engaged more in their futures. We don't have to decide sides in politics, but that's a clear signal that we're seeing from many countries these days. So finally, we are entering a new phase of the Landscapes Forum. You will hear more about that later today, but let me share one of the ambitions right now. In the next 5 years or so, we want to reach and engage 1 billion people. And we will need your help in doing that. So this will be another exciting forum. It's the 4th, following Paris last year, Lima the year before that, and Warsaw 3 years ago. Thank you all for joining and for contributing, and let me end by saying that we're all part of this movement. Thank you and welcome.
Well, it's a great pleasure to join you here as Australia's Environment and Energy Minister, together with my Foreign Minister representing our country here at COP22. It has to be said there is a positive mood here at Marrakesh, given what has transpired in the last 12 months. To think that in that period, more than 190 countries have adopted targets to reduce their emissions at Paris, that the agreement was subsequently signed and now has been ratified by more than 100 different nations. And Australia is very proud to be part of one of those nations that has now ratified the agreement. And together with the work that was done through the Montreal Protocol to phase down the use of HFCs, hydrofluorocarbons, at which Australia was the co-chair of the working group. The agreement recently in the international aviation sector to reduce emissions, and the other work that we are doing through the Green Climate Fund, of which Australia is a co-chair with South Africa, and the Climate Finance Roadmap, which we worked side by side with the UK to lead, has been a sign of the significant momentum that is gathering around the world to actually reduce our emissions in a significant way to meet our targets. It's also a particular pleasure to be here at the Global Landscapes Forum. And this is an important forum, the world's leading event for innovative ideas on sustainable land use. The land sector accounts for nearly 20% of global emissions. Australia is a world leader in measuring and managing land sector emissions, due in no small part to our geography. We are the world's largest island and at the same time the world's smallest continent. Today I want to make 3 points about Australia's recent experiences. The first is about the importance of establishing the capacity to measure and manage our carbon in the landscapes. The second is about how Australia is sharing our expertise and working with partners in our region, including through the Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit. And the third is about the need to extend our knowledge to measuring and managing blue carbon in better ways. First, measuring and managing carbon in our land. Australia's land mass is immense. We have a land area of 8 million square kilometres. Over half of this is agricultural land, with around 14% being forest. Being able to measure carbon in the Australian landscape is absolutely critical to tracking our progress towards our emissions reduction targets. We also know that what you can't measure, you can't manage. Australia was an early adopter of sophisticated satellite observation and carbon modelling methods to estimate emissions from the land sector. The investments we have made in our inventory system are now paying dividends. Not only has our system consistently been found to meet the UNFCCC's high standards, but also provides the foundation for our domestic mitigation efforts. This includes our Emissions Reduction Fund, which delivers the lowest cost abatement from across the economy. It's driving significant emissions reductions and has had a big effect on traditional owners of the land, farmers and other land holders. The fund has secured more than 143 million tonnes of abatement over 3 auctions in the past 2 years, and the 4th auction is occurring as we speak. Over 115 million tonnes, or 80% of all the emission reductions under this fund, are from the land sector. This includes projects that will allow natural forests to regrow, store carbon in the soil, and reduce methane emissions from the intensive livestock industry. Our policy is also driving important co-benefits. A prime example is savanna fire management across the north of Australia. These projects reduce late-season wild bushfires and deliver significant abatement. More than 8 million tonnes are currently estimated to have been saved. But of equal importance is that these projects improve the protection of the cultural and environmental values, allowing our Indigenous people and traditional landowners to remain on country and to actively manage important cultural sites. The second area I wanted to talk about was capacity building and partnerships. Australia is sharing its expertise and working with partners to build their capacity to manage and to measure carbon in their landscape. More than 100 countries have recognised the role of the land sector in their national contributions at the Paris Agreement. Australia is working with partner countries in our region to support the development of these systems so that they can accurately and transparently report greenhouse gas emissions. This includes our long-standing and productive work with Indonesia to support its development of forest management, reporting and verification, and also working with the United States, Norway and the FAO and global space agencies to ensure that all countries can benefit from this expertise through the Global Forest Observations Initiative. In terms of the Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit, we convened this a few years ago, and it supports the implementation of the Paris Agreement and reduces emissions from deforestation. In Australia's region, a conservative estimate of emissions from forest and land use change is approximately 1 billion tonnes of CO2 per year from Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. This is nearly twice Australia's annual total emissions from all sectors. Given the scale of this challenge, I was pleased to join ministers from across the Asia-Pacific in Brunei earlier this year at the Partnership's second Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit. Discussions at the summit underlined 3 key challenges in my mind. The first was that governments in the region are committed to conserve their great forests, yet progress and practical results have been slow. The second, the private sector needs to be at the table if we are going to tackle the causes of deforestation and attract more sustainable investments and industries. And 3, we need to develop cost-effective, credible methods for measuring and managing forest carbon. Given these challenges, I'm pleased to confirm today that Australia will commit $16 million to an Indo-Pacific Land Action Package. This package will support a range of measures to promote emissions reductions in the land sector, including supporting innovative public-private sector partnerships. This investment builds on the objectives of the Asia-Pacific Rainforest Summit and the Global Landscapes Forum in conserving the region's forests and carbon stock. Finally, the third topic I wanted to mention was the International Partnership for Blue Carbon. After launching the International Blue Carbon Partnership, Australia has welcomed several new members, including the UAE and the Nature Conservancy, who have expressed their support for the partnership at this COP. This is an important example, and an innovative one, of countries, research organisations and NGOs working together to achieve positive climate outcomes in our landscapes. There is a growing recognition of the critical importance of different landscapes, not just forests, but also coastal blue carbon ecosystems such as mangroves, tidal marshes and seagrasses. These systems sequester up to 4 times the amount of carbon that is sequestered by terrestrial forests, and their loss is a significant contributor to global deforestation emissions. Our vision is for more countries to incorporate blue carbon into their nationally determined contributions, and again this will require getting the basics in place, the methods for measurement, reporting and verification, and subsequently linking prospective projects with climate finance. In Australia, we are beginning to build blue carbon into our national inventory, and we'll look to share what we learn with the partnership to help build capacity in managing and measuring these systems. In conclusion, I'm proud of Australia's expertise in the land sector and of our track record in building this capacity in our region, and our efforts to find new ways to support climate action in our landscapes. As our Prime Minister in Australia, Malcolm Turnbull, has said, Australia is at the forefront of energy and climate science innovation. Australia will continue to forge new ground, as well as find ways to help others, including some of our nearest Pacific neighbours who are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. We will continue to bring our innovative thinking and technical expertise to bear on the key challenges of meeting both our own targets and our collective ambitions under the Paris Agreement. I thank you for joining us at this important event, and I wish you all well in our deliberation as to how we protect, preserve and promote our beautiful landscapes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holgreen and Mr. Frydenberry, for your opening remarks that reminded us of the importance of such forums in exchanging good case practices and exchanging ideas in general. Speaking about exchange and debate, I will be introducing our moderator for tonight, Mr. Elwyn Granger-Joner, Executive Director of CGIO System Organization. He will be moderating our diverse panel, and I'd like you to give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Not a great start, my microphone's not working. Hello everyone. I wonder if our panel could join us and come up and sit. And while I'm doing that, let me just say a few words about the format today. We have about an hour and a quarter, and we want to make it really interactive and quite informal. We've all been to many events where we'll agree with each other, and it can be a little boring, let's be honest. So let's have a bit of a debate and make it interactive. The way it can be interactive is that we're all concise. So I'm going to try and bring in as many questions from the audience as possible, but that only works if you try and keep those to really succinct 30-second kind of interventions. So we're going to try and make that work. I need the rest of my panel. Could they please join us, our ministers, and take a seat, and I will then do the introductions. Is this working yet? No. Hello. And we're missing Minister Bambang. Are you here? Minister Brojonegoro? Okay, it's working. Great. Okay, we have a wonderful panel. Let me introduce them, going from left to right. First, we have His Excellency Bambang Brojonegoro, who is a Minister for National Development Planning in Indonesia. He's in charge of making the Sustainable Development Goals come to life in Indonesia and has an extensive background in finance and economics, so hugely powerful individual, actually. So welcome. No less, we have His Excellency Blairo Maggi, who's the Minister of Agriculture, Livestock and Supply in Brazil, and has been a leading player in a major agricultural enterprise himself before he took public office. And today he will share with us his thinking and plans for restoration in Brazil, we hope. Thirdly, we have Matt Hansen, Professor Matt Hansen, who's a global leader in the science of remote sensing. Really interesting and fascinating area. And we're looking forward to hearing from him about how we can apply that in all our work. Fourthly, we have Ms. Hindu Ibrahim, who coordinates indigenous people engagement in climate negotiations. She comes from a nomadic community in Chad herself, is passionate about access to land and the fight against climate change in Africa and across the globe. Last but not least, we have Wanjira Matai, who is the daughter of the late environmental activist Wangari Maathai. Wanjira once said, this is a wonderful quote, I hope you don't mind me using it, "I'm not living in my mother's shadow, I'm basking in her light." What a wonderful expression. She now leads her own initiative connecting women to sustainable energy and many more things, and is driving female empowerment and sustainable land use in many ways. So I've been asked to just say a few words of framing, and then we're going to turn it over to a discussion. And I really wanted to make 3 points to you. The first is, since this is my first public appearance since I took this role in the CJR, I just wanted to say how delighted and humbled I am by working in such a great partnership. It's been a wonderful start, just a few weeks in, but I have to say one couldn't work with a more committed and intelligent bunch of people. And that's really, I think, the thing that shone out in all my interactions. So we're all really committed to embracing the huge challenge in which we're working. And it's also wonderful to be working in such a broad and diverse network whose strength is something like an ecosystem. It comes from the fact there are many different parts that all come together in a pretty healthy ecosystem, which is even healthier since we've gone through some quite substantial reforms, 2 rounds of reforms in the last few years. And I have to say, I picked up on how much that has helped in terms of how people are working together. And of course, it plays an incredibly important role. So that was the first thing. The second thing is to say how great it is that we are getting to the heart of the matter in these discussions. What I mean by that is we're talking about complexity. We're talking about the fact that you can't just put things in boxes. And when we use the term landscape, actually what we seem to be meaning is we're talking about how things interact across very diverse landscapes and diverse issues within landscapes. Most of my career has been spent trying to take things out of boxes and put them together in different ways. First on trade negotiations, then on agricultural policy, and then on environmental policy, and now back to agriculture. And embracing that complexity or ignoring it seems to be the crux of how we're going to actually solve the huge problems we're facing. It's painful, it's difficult. People like to put things in boxes because you can control them and make sense of them. But unfortunately, it doesn't work, and I think that's what we're seeing. The CG itself has gone through a really extensive process of trying to make sure things don't fit into narrow boxes. And they developed, in a sense, all their research is organized through cross-cutting research programs. There's 11 called CRPs that are specifically designed to ensure that we have a sort of multiple stakeholders involved in the work and thinking. This transformation in thinking has been accelerating. I've seen across our network, and it's wonderful to see that compared to even 5 years ago. But let's be humbled by actually what remains, and that's acknowledging that the food system in many respects is broken and is going in the wrong direction. One just have to look at the numbers. 2 billion obese, more or less the same, hungry or malnourished. On the current trajectory, by 2050, agriculture will account for about 2/3 of global emissions. And if you look at agricultural waste, that's equivalent to being the 3rd largest emitter. So enormous incoherences in our world. Last point is urgency. It's also great to see the sense of urgency that comes out of these discussions. And it's reality that it's really a breathtaking speed that the world planet is going off in a really frightening direction. I had a privilege in my last role to work with Johan Rockström, doing some work for the Global Environment Facility that really pulled it all together and described the change in epoch that's going on. Back over the last 10,000 years, we had a pretty much stable natural environment around us, and that's been changed in the last 50 years. And that's frightening how quickly this is happening. So we need a great leap forward, a great change. We're seeing that happen in energy and transport, and we're seeing it starting in agriculture. But we need to see that go much faster. So let me turn, you had enough from me, let me turn to our panel. I'm going to ask them a few warm-up questions, but then I want to quickly turn to you and walk around the room and take your questions for them. So why don't I go from right to left, since I introduced from left to right. Wanjiro, could you tell us a bit, given your really extensive involvement in land restoration, how you would judge whether a country is making strides forward in this? What are the indicators? What are the features you would expect to see when you're looking at whether a country is making success here?
Thank you, Owen. Is this on?
I have a microphone problem.
Thank you very much, and thank you, C4, for yet another spectacular forum. I think one of the things that is really exciting about the landscape restoration movement, as I call it, is there are already regional initiatives that are committed, that are showing real commitment. We have the 20 by 20 initiative in Latin America, and more recently, the AFR 100, committing 100 million hectares for restoration by 2030. These are fantastic commitments, and I also proudly co-chair the Global Restoration Council with the former Prime Minister of Sweden. And this is, again, a group of leaders around the world who are committed to catalyzing action around landscape restoration. But this is about moving from that level to action. And what does action really look like? I think one of the first things is to see, and I want to mention also that often these regional aspirations emerge from more global targets. So we have the Bonn Challenge that, of course, anchors a lot of what we're talking about, and the New York Forest Declaration. But at the country level is really where the action happens. And so you ask, what does that really look like? One, I'm proud to come from a country, Kenya, that very recently launched its National Landscape Restoration Plan. Do these countries actually have a plan that feeds into these global or regional targets? That's one indicator for success. And then, of course, there is the collaboration between ministries. This is not, again, we've talked a lot about the multi-sectoral nature of landscape restoration. This is not a siloed initiative for the Ministry of Environment. It is a cross-sectoral initiative. And I also, like you said, Arvind, I work in energy and working around renewable energy opportunities for grassroots women. And one of the very successful stories that has come out of that recently is the Ministry of Health in India talking to the Ministry of Energy and deciding that the opportunity to address indoor air pollution and the opportunity to address energy access are very closely linked. And that has led to the head of state, Prime Minister Modi, deciding that he will have 50 million households transition to clean energy tech in the next 3 years. Those are the sorts of inter-ministerial collaborations we would love to see also on the landscape side. And we are seeing them. We have a country like Rwanda, certainly Kenya, and many others who are one of the 21 countries that have committed 63 million hectares for restoration in Africa. And then finally, of course, are the resources. We need to see funds and commitments for real budgetary allocations for restoration at the national level. And if we have those three, I'd say we are on a good track.
And Wangira, what explain from your perspective why this attention is growing to what you're working on? What is it that's changed in the last few years where people are signing up to this stuff?
Well, I don't know if much has changed, but I know for sure that it's becoming very clear that perhaps nothing speaks to sustainable development. We have Agenda 2030. Perhaps nothing speaks to Agenda 2030 more than landscape restoration. It is cross-cutting so many different goals addressed by restoring the integrity of our landscapes. And I am reminded particularly of in northern Kenya, where an aquifer was recently discovered that we were told would serve and give water to Kenya for the next 70 years. And now, while many were celebrating, the Greenbelt movement and organizations like ours were worried because we said 70 years is just not enough. We want that aquifer to be there forever. And what that means is that we begin to think more in a landscape approach. And where does that water come from? Is there a watershed somewhere that is serving that aquifer that we need to protect and that we need to think about? And those are sort of the connections that we need to start making. And I think those realities are coming right back to the integrity of our landscapes. The ecosystem services, we are not talking enough as we did during the Millennium Ecosystem days, because now we are seeing that the ecosystem services are about survival, and the Sustainable Development Goals speak directly to those ecosystem services. So I think landscapes are an amazing opportunity and really one of the quickest wins for us to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thanks so much. Let's move along to Hindu. Hindu, you've spent so many years trying to bring a voice into global discussions, amongst others, including climate negotiations. Do you think you're being listened to now? And if not, why not?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for this continuation of the Global Landscape Forum during the climate change. This is really good to have this back-to-back meeting, firstly. Coming to your questions, yes, indigenous peoples groups are organized and mobilized during all these years into the discussion through the Landscape Forum or also through the climate negotiations. But our movement, it's always the same. Like what we are claiming it's respect, promote the right of indigenous peoples. And they cannot respect it and promote it without us. So that's why like we are getting involved in it. What is changed, I think after these 20 years or more than 20 years now of the climate negotiations, indigenous peoples have been just recognized as one of the observers under the UNFCCC. Yes, okay. But we had in Cancun, the Cancun Agreement, who recognized the right of indigenous peoples, and coming to the implementation is still a challenge. And we come to the red issues in Warsaw, also red issue recognized. But the big thing that we work on it and we get, it's through the Paris agreements. So last year, indigenous peoples worked very hardly, and we get 5 references through the Paris agreement into the decisions. So in the Paris agreement, firstly, we get the indigenous peoples' rights into the preambles. And the Article 7.5 of the Paris Agreement recognize the knowledge of indigenous peoples as part of the solution to the adaptations. Then beyond there is, yes, stakeholder participation in others. But the issue for us is not having this writing thing into the documents. This is not saving our life. This is not resolving our issues. When we come we are showed that yes, to take the decision, we need to be included. But where we need the real action is underground, where the parties are implementing all the action and also the other stakeholders. So coming for this one, when we revise all the NDCs of countries, there is 165, if I'm right. It's only 24 NDCs who mention human rights, just as the tool. 14 of them mention human rights into the implementations. 7 of them say, yes, human rights is important. So this gap between what the decision at the international level regarding the rights of indigenous peoples, land protection, natural resources protection, and the implementations, this is a big issue. Coming in Marrakesh here, the second negotiation will start at 3:30. We are discussing about the paragraph 135 into the knowledge platform exchange for indigenous peoples. So for this one, we want to have our clear participation on it, because they are going to discuss about indigenous peoples' knowledge, and they cannot discuss for us and without us. But this is what is happening right now in this room, and it's going to happen in 1 hour. So this is the level of the participation that we are in the international level.
Thanks so much. Well, congratulations on what you've achieved so far. But a long way to go by the sounds of it, but we're glad you're on this. Matt, could I turn to you? I wonder, just a bit of crystal ball gazing, you're deeply involved in the science of remote sensing. Where do you think this might be in, say, 10 years? And how might that affect how we work?
The idea of operational monitoring is kind of boring. It's remote sensing might be deemed a cutting-edge, sexy science, but we need to get into the real boring, operational, repeated product generation that helps us establish baselines and evaluate progress for all these commitments. And I think the example of Brazil, which is always held, we need to replicate that example manyfold, and we haven't yet. So the idea that low latency, reliable updates of forest resources and their changes, deforestation in particular, are produced systematically, released to the public, validated, and this becomes this routine. It needs to spread, and I don't think there's a really good excuse why we're so slow with that. And different countries, a lot of countries very close to approximating Brazil, but Brazil still is the standard, and I think that's a big deal. And as we go to the future, you can imagine every pixel on Earth, every pixel on a remote sensor, sorry, every patch of ground on Earth has a land use history attached to it, and we know the resource use there, we know the ecosystem services therein, and I see 50-year, 100-year histories of discrete patches of ground that tell us how well we're doing in managing our resources. That's where I think we are going. I think to differentiate, again, the operational versus the research, we work in parallel. Research is using the coolest, newest signal from space or airborne data, but we can't let that distract us from the boring work of doing just the basic tracking of the forest cover and the forest types and whether they're being deforested or restored. I think that's kind of the big deal. I also think we have to champion the idea of global good public infrastructure for Earth observation data. The reason Brazil's done so well is they've used Landsat, which is a US system. Landsat's been the backbone of the PROTUS data set, the deforestation data set in Brazil, and it's used by a lot of countries around the world. The analogy I like to make, and I don't know if it's a great one, but GPS, if you had to pay for every GPS signal that came down to your phone to do whatever it is to navigate your way to the market, would you pay for it? You wouldn't. But we spawned industries off of that free GPS signal. And I think Earth observation has to be at the same level to support these climate commitments and to really manage our global resources. We should have public data streams of Earth observation data. So I really think that's a key point moving forward, that when we're 10, 20, 30 years out, there's a democratization of the data at whatever spatial resolution it is, but it's global, it's consistent, and any civil society group, government, private industry can avail themselves of that resource to try and document this, and we end up having the same set of facts in terms of how we're managing our forest resources and land in general.
Thanks, Matt. I can't resist asking you this question. You're a sort of purist scientist on this panel. I mean, what does it feel like being a scientist in an era when many are describing us as moving to sort of post-truth time, when a lot of scientific logic is being questioned in many places? What does that feel like for you?
Great. No, it's really, it's not a, we're not meant to be advocates, so we have to be very, we always say we're presenting a set of facts, and, in general, I personally value the natural forest, natural system biodiversity, but it's not my job to advocate for that. So we're out of our comfort zone always, whenever there's, not always, but usually if there's a scientist and a politician debating a topic, the politician destroys the scientist because they speak with more passion, and they know the buttons to push and that sort of thing, and so we have to get better at that, but I think we have to be careful not to become advocates and really fulfill what they think we are, which is advocates for a certain thing, and we're not truly unbiased and neutral, fact-based people. But I think also, in the United States, you go from creationism to climate change, denial to birtherism. It's the same thing. It's this post-fact, faith-based thing. You're not going to argue with facts. So some of it is really, I don't want to say insurmountable, but it's not, maybe not worth your time. I think that communication between groups, to the degree we can, in the United States, clear it was a rural-urban. I don't know, are we all urbanites here? How many people live in the places like South Central Indiana that voted strongly for Trump? How do we communicate with those populations that are not the Davos crowd, or much less the academic crowd? I think that's where we break down these barriers. I don't have to get an answer to it, but it's clear, these clear cleavages in our society where everybody's in their own echo chamber. And I don't want to say we're an echo chamber, but sort of, right? And so I don't have an answer to that, but that's what we have to do.
Great answer. Sorry to throw that question at you. Mischievous of me. Thank you. Minister Manji, in all respects, you're in the hot seat, trying to manage competing demands on landscapes in Brazil. I wonder if you can say a bit about how you are trying to manage those competing demands, and including, if you will, how you are trying to manage the competing demands emanating from energy requirements too.
Bem, muito obrigado pelo convite de estar aqui. Inicialmente, o Brasil não tem, nesse momento, grande conflito entre a área ambiental e a área de produção. Temos conflitos quando no licenciamento desses projetos, mas na macro política brasileira nós não encontramos esse conflito, e eu vou explicar na sequência.
Hello, I'd like to thank you and say that in Brazil we don't have actually a great conflict between environmental questions and production. So maybe some difficulties may arise regarding certification, but on a macro-politic level, there is no problem in Brazil at the moment.
Por exemplo, foi dito aqui na questão da proteção das nascentes, das águas, nós no Brasil temos uma legislação já bastante antiga que exige que cada produtor rural, cada fazendeiro, cada sitiante, quem é dono de um pedaço de terra, que faça a proteção das margens dos rios e das nascentes de todos os córregos brasileiros.
An important matter where we talked about water and the source of water, and in Brazil we have a quite old already law which is protecting the rivers and the places where water come from, where the source of water.
E é importante observar que isso começou como uma obrigação de lei, mas hoje você encontra nas fazendas dos proprietários rurais que fazem isso, obviamente, para obedecer à lei, mas fazem porque têm uma consciência ambiental de que as águas e o ecossistema que ele vive deve ser preservado.
So this is an obligation by law. However, the farmers in Brazil at the moment are complying with that law because they have to, but also because they are aware of the importance of water and the environment.
Então nós temos um ambiente de paisagem no país bem complexo, mas ao mesmo tempo bem harmônico, né? Porque nós procuramos ter atividades agrícolas e, por exemplo, o Brasil ocupa para atividades de plantio e colheita apenas 8% do território brasileiro.
Yes, and to give you an idea how in the environment, although it is complex, we have harmony, and the agricultural activity in Brazil now is actually accounting only for 8% of land use in the country.
Nós ainda temos 61% do território brasileiro preservado ainda da forma original, quando os portugueses descobriram o Brasil. Quer dizer, em 1500 até hoje o Brasil conserva 61% do seu território.
And it is important to know that Brazil is preserving 61% of its territory in the way it was 500 years ago when the Portuguese arrived to Brazil. So this native area is actually being preserved since forever.
Como diz o professor, acho que o Brasil é um caso a ser observado. Eu até gostaria de convidar os CEOs das ONGs que estão aqui ou que poderão depois receber esse convite, de conhecer o Brasil, o interior do Brasil, a agricultura brasileira, de como ela é feita, da forma transparente com que o Brasil pratica essa política de meio ambiente e agrícola também.
And I'd like to say, and we heard this today already, that Brazil, in my opinion, is an interesting country regarding what's being done at the moment. And I'd like here to invite the NGOs to come and discover Brazil and the way we are implementing our environmental policies in a very transparent manner.
Bem, a resposta da pergunta agora é a questão da energia. O setor de energia sustentável no Brasil, ou renovável no Brasil, ele tem 41% da sua energia totalmente renovável, que é uma matriz limpa. E o setor agrícola brasileiro, ele é responsável por 29,1% dessa energia renovável, quer dizer, energia a partir de etanol, a partir de biodiesel e outras fontes renováveis que nós temos. Então, o Brasil já tem, nesse momento, 41,2% da energia renovável, enquanto a OCDE se debate com 9,4% e o mundo tem 13,5%. Então, mais uma vez, não só no setor agrícola, mas no setor de energia, o Brasil tem muito a contribuir com essa questão ambiental.
Brazil can also contribute a lot for agriculture and energy. To answer to your question on energy, I'd like to say that today our sector of energy relies on renewables for 41%, and that in the agriculture, the production of renewable energy in the agriculture is 29.1% through ethanol and biodiesel. So Brazil has this figure of 41% of renewables today, compared to the OECD, who has only 9.4%, and the world that has an average of 13.5%.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Minister, for a very full answer. I'm sure there'll be many questions, so let's get to those by moving on to your colleague, Minister. Thank you so much. Let's turn to Minister Brodjonegero. And I think we would just love to hear from you, Minister, about what's it like to be in your shoes week to week when you are managing these very difficult decisions that are around landscapes. What are the kind of issues that or challenges you face in coordinating that?
First of all, thank you very much to C4 for the invitation. So, talking about conflicting land use and landscape, I think we can bring all of you back to the global goal commitment, the Sustainable Development Goal 2030. in which you can see there are 4 goals that might be relevant to the issue of the landscape and land use management. The first goal number 2 actually, is zero hunger, meaning we are talking about food security. The second goal would be goal number 7, about energy security, how to get affordable and accessible and modern energy for all. And then we have third goal, which is goal number 13, combating climate change and its impact. This is why we are all gathering here in Marrakesh. And then fourth goal would be goal number 15, protecting, restoring, and promoting sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystem. So in order to deal with the 4 goals, food security, energy security, climate change, and protection of the terrestrial ecosystem, we need to make an integrated planning. And this is my responsibility, at least for Indonesia. The question is, how can you make this integrated planning? Maybe one way to make the integrated planning covering all of these issues is by linking sustainable land management and green growth. So again, this looks easy in the document, but when it comes to the reality, when it comes to the implementation, then you will face some conflicting goals. So in our ideas, when you make the development planning, you have to make sure you maintain the balance between growth, poverty, and climate change, meaning that one cannot sacrifice the other. If you want to promote the goal, you cannot sacrifice the climate change. Vice versa. If you want to promote the climate change, you cannot sacrifice, for example, poverty. So when it comes to the reality, especially in the case of Indonesia, especially in the Java Island, for those of you who are not familiar with Indonesia, Java Island is not the largest island in Indonesia, but it is the most densely populated island with the highest contribution to our GDP. So you can imagine that there will be a fight for the land use in Java, for agriculture, for industry, as well for infrastructure. So you can imagine the complication in that issue. So in our idea, when we try to promote infrastructure development, you will need, a big chunk of land. But at the same time, in Java, which is also the most fertile island in Indonesia, then the source of agriculture product mostly coming from Java. So when you're trying to get land as much as possible to build the toll road, to build the power generation, or to build big airport, big seaports, at the same time, you have to face the needs of the big area to expand our paddy field in order to produce rice more as our staple food. So from the beginning, you already face the conflicting land use that sometimes create, big debate whether you want the Java Island to have much better infrastructure, or you prefer Java Island to be the source of agriculture product. And usually what we are trying to solve is by emphasizing more on agriculture side, rather than expanding the paddy field, we better focus on increasing the productivity, because we still feel that the rice productivity in Indonesia is still very low compared to our neighbors in Southeast Asia. So rather than talking about excessive land, talking about productivity. In infrastructure, of course, we are trying to be as efficient as possible. So whenever there is a need for toll road, we are trying to use the existing land rather than expanding the new road or new connection among cities in Java Island. And then, when you are talking about agriculture, at the same time, you are talking about the poverty. As you know, the players in agriculture is small farmers. They need, they need agriculture in order for, surviving economically. So they need the land. So that's why we are trying to do the land reform right now. But at the same time, we face the reality that it's hard to get affordable land for them, especially the land that will be productive for agriculture. So now we are trying again to emphasize on productivity. We are trying to increase, to improve the capacity building of our farmers in order to focus on productivity rather than getting, larger area for the agricultural activities. So I think the complication is there. So from planning perspective, especially if you are in charge for development planning, again, one keyword is maintaining the balance between the growth, poverty, and again, the climate change. And one cannot sacrifice the other. And when it comes to the conflicting land use, then you need to be firm on the priority. If the priority on certain area would be infrastructure, then go for infrastructure. But if you think that the priority for the other area is agriculture, go for agriculture and then put the infrastructure or other priority as the second or third priority. So I believe from planning perspective, setting the priority is important in order to maintain the landscape.
Thank you so much, Minister. I think, like Minister Manji, there'll be many questions for you. So let me let the audience ask the follow-up. Now, we've done really well. We actually have about 35 minutes for questions. So really, over to you. We have a great panel. If you could keep your questions really short, that really helps us have a discussion. Don't be afraid to politely and respectfully disagree or raise a point. I think that gets the debate going. If I start walking towards you when you have the microphone, that means you're going on a bit and need to get to the point. So who wants to come in and ask a question? I'm hoping we'll have no lack of participants. Please, if you could briefly say who you are as well.
Thank you. Patrick Worms from the World Agroforestry Center. And in the interest of keeping the conversation confrontational, I have a question to the Brazilian minister who described land use patterns in his country as harmonious. Yet there seems to be evidence that deforestation rates in the Amazon, for example, which have dropped consistently for a very long time, for which I wish to congratulate the Brazilian people, are now rising again. What is going on?
Now, why don't we take a couple of questions and then I'll turn to the panel again. Who would like to follow up on that question, please?
In order to get out of the echo chamber, my name is Ari McLaughlin. I'm here as an independent writer and journalist. In order to get out of the echo chamber, how do individuals take climate action? What can we do to commit to landscape restoration?
Thank you. What about this side? This lady.
This is a comment actually for the professor, and I think I would actually disagree. I think our scientists have got to be communicators. I think there can't be a separation between science and politics because, of course, we're in post-fact society. I think in part because our scientists say, "Oh no, I'm not policy. I'm just the faxer," and I think that's a problem. And I'm the secretary of Vermont's Agency of Natural Resources, so I see up close and personal how important it is to have translators of science. And I'm wondering if this is something you're hearing from your students. So as you're working with younger people, I'm observing that they really do see that connection between doing good science and communicating about it for public policy.
Thank you. Let me try and hand this down.
Thank you. My name is Linda Davis. I'm from W Power. My question is for the minister from Indonesia and as well as Wanjira Mathai. You both have mentioned how landscapes are important to achieving the SDGs, and that's very encouraging. I'm interested in your comments around the fact that biomass energy is responsible, the second responsible for landscape destruction. question. I'm just interested to see how, the both of you are, think about that, because, wood energy, biomass energy is actually a problem in, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa.
Boa tarde, gente. Minha pergunta é para você, Maggie, em torno a sua comentário sobre a harmonia que existe agora no Brasil. Eu gostaria de aprender mais sobre como é que, se existe essa harmonia no Brasil, então, por que o Brasil ha virado um dos países mais perigosos para os ativistas que protegem o meio ambiente? Em 5 anos, tem mais de 200 pessoas que têm morrido. A maioria deles são pessoas indígenas, então eu gostaria de escutar um pouquinho sobre o que você acha disso. So hello, and my question is directed to the Minister of Brazil, and I would like for him to explain his opinion on how it is that this harmony exists when Brazil is one of the most dangerous countries for environmental activists, where 200 environmental activists have died in the past 5 years, and I would just welcome his opinion.
Okay, I think, well, I did ask for respectfully challenging questions, and that's what we got. So let me turn to the panel, and perhaps go from left to right this time. The Minister from Indonesia, there was a question about biomass energy, and it would be great to hear your thoughts on that, and how you'd manage some of the challenges around that and opportunities. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for the question. In fact, in order to reach, of course, the goal of emission reduction in Indonesia, one way to do that is by promoting more renewable energy. In Indonesia, when you're talking about renewable energy, of course, you might think about geothermal, you might think about hydro, but I think lately the most promising renewable energy actually coming from the bioenergy, including the biomass. So now actually we encourage more, private sector, SMEs, as well as local government to promote more biomass energy, especially in the area in which there is no national grid. But then, I heard the question is whether this biomass energy could contribute to the land degradation. I believe there are many types of bioenergy in Indonesia. Of course, now the most promising one, and the one that used relatively quite massive, is a biofuel. Biofuel, of course, coming from the crude palm oil. So far, biofuel, I think, contributed a lot in order to reduce the fossil fuel, the diesel fuel. And aside from the biofuel, now we are trying to promote the biomass, especially from the livestock, as well as from the CPO itself. So now, in fact, the CPO plantation can generate the power using their biomass. So I believe this is more sustainable model, because at the end you can still promote the bioenergy while at the same time you still you still be able to increase the production. So I believe in Indonesia, bioenergy could be our renewable energy in the future together with the hydro.
Thanks so much. If we could turn to Minister Maggi, there were questions on rates of deforestation and safety of environmental activists.
Obrigado. Com respeito à questão amazônica, o Brasil, de fato, fez um grande trabalho nos últimos anos. Eu fui governador de um estado, o estado do Mato Grosso, por 2 mandatos que desmatavam 1.300.000 hectares por ano até 2004. Ao terminar meu mandato, nós estávamos com 30.000 hectares aproximadamente desmatando. Então, foi um trabalho muito grande, não só no estado do Mato Grosso, no Brasil inteiro, que resultou numa diminuição muito forte no desmatamento no Brasil.
So I'd like to talk first of the question on deforestation and say that Brazil is doing tremendous efforts, and I was governor for 2 mandates in Mato Grosso to fight against this problem, and in over 2 mandates we managed to decrease deforestation from 1,030,000 hectares to 30,000 hectares per year. So Brazil is really doing a big effort to sink this deforestation problem.
Atitudes como, junto com Greenpeace, WWF, PAN e tantos outros ONGs que trabalham no Brasil, numa atitude proativa, fizemos até uma moratória da soja no Brasil em áreas de desmatamento ilegal. E é sobre isso que nós estamos vendo no Brasil nesse momento, um aumento do desmatamento na Amazônia, ainda que pequeno em relação ao que se fazia no passado, mas nós temos que separar o que é desmatamento ilegal do que é desmatamento legal. No Brasil, ainda, a nossa legislação permite que 20% das áreas de floresta amazônica possam ser convertidas em atividades agrícolas e pecuárias.
So there has been done a lot of work with Greenpeace, WWF and other NGOs. There is a proactive attitude, there's a moratorium on illegal deforestation, and there is a slight increase in deforestation, but it's very important to make the difference between legal and illegal deforestation. And in Brazil, it's authorized by law to use until 20% of the forest area for agricultural activity.
Então, o desmatamento também, como disse o ministro da Indonésia, tem muito a ver com a atividade econômica de um país. O Brasil, de 2002 a 2013, 14, teve um crescimento econômico importante. Então, você reduz automaticamente a pressão sobre a floresta. No momento em que nós temos uma atividade econômica menor na atividade empresarial, da agrícola e também industrial, é quase que natural que haja uma pressão maior sobre a floresta. E é nesse ponto que o governo brasileiro está se atendo nesse momento.
Regarding still deforestation, the economic activity is also linked to this deforestation problem. Brazil had a very big economic growth between 2002 2013, so there was no so much pressure on the forest, that the economic activity is now not so intense, so there has been more pressure on the forest and less activity in the private sector, agriculture, industry, etc.
Poderia continuar falando muito mais, mas temos tempo. Com respeito à questão dos ativistas, eu quando falei de harmonia, eu falei na harmonia da legislação, na harmonia das paisagens, que é um dos pontos que nós estamos aqui a discutir. Como é que as paisagens, como é que elas se compõem no meio ambiente. Mas com respeito a assassinatos que foi colocado, eu discordo totalmente dos números. Nós temos conflitos sim no Brasil, não podemos negar, mas eles não são dessa forma. Existem muitas brigas, muitas coisas que acontecem que são ditas, que são relacionadas à briga de terras, à briga por posse da terra, à briga por questões ambientais, mas quando você vai no cerne da questão, você vai ver que tu tem problema de relacionamento de pessoas em determinados lugares e que não pode ser computado nessa questão por uma crise ou por uma perseguição aos ambientalistas no Brasil. Muito pelo contrário, são todos muito bem-vindos, são bem recebidos. Eventualmente se tem conflito, eu não estou negando que não tem, mas na grande maioria os ambientalistas são muito bem-vindos, muito bem recebidos no Brasil. Aliás, o Brasil é um país que tem observado muito mais a questão ambiental no mundo que qualquer outro lugar que possamos olhar.
And well, we don't have that much time to talk longer about this, but about activists, I want to say that I talked about harmony regarding our law, regarding our landscapes for the environment, but regarding the death and what you said about the numbers that you quoted, I cannot agree. There are different arguments, there are different positions regarding the land in Brazil, but this problem has more to do with the relations between people, and activists are not being threatened, they're being welcomed. There are conflicts, as I say, but Brazil is committed to protecting the environment and is an important player in that matter.
Thank you, Minister. Matt, there was a question about scientists as advocates.
Yeah, maybe after this session I'll be an advocate. But I think that I don't disagree with the comment at all. You know, we certainly, science informs policy. There's no question about it. When you talk about deforestation rates, the implication for the biogeochemical cycle are this, the implications for climate change are this, for biodiversity. These are the things we relate to the policymakers, and hopefully they incorporate them in their decisions. The wider community, communicating to the wider community, is a trickier thing. And if you talk about advocacy, the example I draw from is we work a lot internationally, and we work in Indonesia, the Ministry of Forestry, work in the Congo, and I come from a deforested landscape. Indiana was 90% hardwood forest before the settlers came, and it's all corn and soybean now. It's the same thing, exact same thing that's happening in Mato Grosso. And for me to take my values and really just say, you know, hey, don't do this when I literally live and that kind of benefited from that trajectory of development is presumptuous. So I also think that when you're talking about capacity transfer and sharing methods, keeping the values out of it that you're for one outcome versus another is more honest. And when we work with the Ministry of Forestry, these are the methods we use to quantify rates of primary forest loss, to quantify land use, et cetera. We have to keep it clean like that. It's only appropriate. So, but at the same time, the communication, getting around the echo chamber, I don't know if that's a generic role for every scientist. You know, when I was growing up, we had Carl Sagan. Now we have Neil deGrasse Tyson. But the idea of popular science has a huge role to play, and to put these things in the context of our shared values. I don't know if that's the role of every person that's working in our field, though.
Thanks, Matt. Moving on, Hindu, there was a question about what can we do as individuals in all this? Now, you've clearly done a lot. You know, what advice would you say to someone that asked that question directly of you? What can I do as an individual? I'm feeling perhaps overwhelmed by the scale of the problems. What can you share on that?
I mean, yeah, individual can do a lot. When we talk regarding the rights and right respect, people who are implementing the project, they have to do not accept the project who are not respecting the rights of the peoples, the project who are grabbing the land. The individual can see what is positive and what is negative. We have to be consistent with what we are doing, because regarding land, natural resources, any action is contained. It could be in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, everywhere. You do this action, think about someone who is beyond your region, because it's going to impact the same atmosphere. So what you can do is how you can help the policy to implement the right decision that they took. They agree into the Paris Agreement. They agree through many other issues. But when they go back home, they are implementing it not in the right way. Every individual have the right to protest, to say, no, you have to respect what you do, because it's have impact in my life also, even I'm not involved directly. So right to talk, denunciate what is negative, and promote what is positive, and that can help people to understand more. We know that many people do not know why indigenous people are fighting for the land, for the specific rights, for the specific access. But when you hear from us directly, and you be with us and you fight, so this lack of information, it can block many things. But the flowing of information can give also many positive aspects. I don't have maybe the exact response, but that's really what I can recommend you. And as journalists, I think you know how information are very crucial, and communicate this one to each individual is very important. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, Wanjira, you want to comment on any of that? And specifically, there was also a question on biomass that you may have, biomass energy that you may have views on.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree more with Hindu. I think each of us in our own circumstances can do something where we are. If we're journalists, are these stories about climate change the ones we write about? Are we amplifying those messages? If we're students, informing ourselves, joining advocacy groups or joining groups, like in Kenya we have the Kenyan Youth for Climate Justice. Become part of something. Make that part of your commitment to do something in your local community. And I think the enormity of the issue is often because we think we have to do something about the 2 degrees directly. No, what can I do at home in Kenya, in Nairobi, that will help the situation? For me personally, how do I transfer those values to my children? What are we doing in the house that is making that message clear to them? So it's in our everyday lives, yes, but also in the associations that we have. And then in our professions, of course, the choices we make, for the stories we tell, for the people we associate with, and the issues we stand for. And I think those are the sorts of things that will make a difference. On the issue of biomass, it's definitely one of the big questions. And one of the things I often say is that the deforestation is not because of the small-scale farmer who is cooking a meal and meals for their families, often driven by illegal or commercial charcoal production. And I think one of the ways that governments can really stand up for this issue, especially in the context of landscapes, is to look at this issue of the charcoal value chain. It is one of the mysteries of most countries and the devastation that charcoal produces, but also the lucrative nature of the charcoal value chain itself, and how we can, it's not informal, so we often say, how do we legitimize, how do we begin to look at a more sustainable value chain for charcoal? Because that is one of the greatest drivers, at least in the global south, for deforestation. So I'd say looking at a more sustainable production, and we talked a little bit about some of the new and renewable energy, clean cooking and more efficient burning of these biomass fuels, but then also looking at regularizing what is the biggest driver for this deforestation.
Thanks, Wanjira. I wish we had another 2 or 3 hours with this panel, frankly, but we've got time for a couple more rounds of questions and also quick comments if you want to make them, but please make them quick, like 30 seconds quick. This gentleman here.
Good afternoon. My name is Paulo Adario. I am Brazilian from Greenpeace, and I also am the Brazilian coordinator of the Soya Moratorium Working Group from the civil society for more than 10 years. I have 2 comments. One to Minister Bang Bang from Indonesia is when you describe, Minister, the options that you have in front of you in Indonesia to ensure the sustainable energy. You just mentioned hydro and biofuels. It's a pity that you didn't include, for instance, solar and wind and other options, in particular in Indonesia, where the expansion of biofuels means the expansion of palm oil, which has causing a lot of problems. And also hydro is considered, including by the World Bank by now, as having a lot of impact. And for Minister Maggi, thank you for your clarification. Minister, I have been one of the people that received that threats in Brazil. And I need to say and recognize the Brazilian government provide me security for more than 1.5 years through the federal police. As a player of the Soya Moratorium, as one of the coordinators, I want to thank you, Minister Maggi, because his company is part of the Soya Moratorium since the very beginning. What's a great thing. But just to refresh, the Soya Moratorium is not only about illegal deforestation. The Soya Moratorium is about putting a hold in deforestation as well. And this is why we have been so well succeeded. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman here.
Thank you. I'm Lawrence Songa from Uganda. I'm a member of parliament and chairs the Parliamentary Forum on Climate Change. Most refugees in Africa leave their country because of natural resource-based conflicts. And when they come, they are mostly settled in protected areas. What would be your comments how to use a landscape approach in handling refugees and migration? Thank you.
Thank you. This gentleman here at the end.
Thank you. My name is Lou Verscho from the Center for International Tropical Agriculture. And my question is for Wanjira. And Wanjira, I'd like to get you to comment a little bit about the quality of restoration. You know, I've been associated with the 20 by 20 initiative in Latin America, and we see a lot of proposals coming up where restoration on 2,500 hectares involves 2,000 hectares of plantation of pine and eucalyptus and 500 hectares of indigenous species. What can we do to sort of move beyond this sort of hiding these industrial ideas behind this restoration and move to some sort of quality restoration in these landscapes, so we're actually putting the ecosystems back and the ecosystem services back, and you know, what is your group doing to raise the quality of what's being proposed, and how can we amplify that so that some of these things that are being proposed that are more hidden commercial types of operations actually are discouraged, and we're actually really restoring the ecosystem services.
Thank you. Why don't I take a few more? Moving back here, any questions, comments? Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Rosa Maria Vidal from the Governor's Climate and Forest Fund. A question regarding leadership and how to really combine policies from the different sectors. We have to realize that we still are organized by sectors. You have ministries of agriculture, environment, planning. How high-level decision makers are putting together and organizing basically a new paradigm for rural development in your countries, and if you think the forces behind, you know, the interests behind are going to be supporting those changes.
Thank you. This gentleman here.
Thank you. My name is Arif Rabik from the Environmental Bamboo Foundation. Just a question for Mr. Bambang and Mrs. Wanjira. Want to ask about the option of biomass for large-scale electrification, woody biomass, especially gasification. It's a real option. Maybe you can comment about the risks. Is it snake oil? Please, thank you.
Thanks. This gentleman.
Hi, my name is Harley Kropp. I'm an journalist. I have a question in terms of the priority setting. In terms of when you are looking at the, there was a comment about how there are priorities that need to be set between the needs of the public, the needs of industry, and so on, and environmental degradation in that paradigm. And when we know that environmental degradation will, in the long term, lead to massive suffering of peoples, is that being prioritized because it has such a long term? Because it's on a 20-year, 50-year plan? Is that being set aside for temporal benefits to people in that charter? You know, we have to benefit the people, but are we really prioritizing that intelligently?
Yeah, the curse of short-termism. This gentleman.
My name is Frank Martin Seifert from the European Space Agency. I have a comment towards Matt Hansen, and together with the European Commission we have set up a monitoring system for the environment called Copernicus, and the Sentinel data are like CBUS from Brazil and Landsat, freely available to all and everybody to monitor the environment, to monitor landscape, to monitor forest and agriculture and biomass. And that is really a step from out Europe to democratize the information flow, not only for governments, but as well for non-governmental organizations monitoring the environment in your vicinity.
People like that. And
I'm Elizabeth Braybeck, a professor from the University of Massachusetts, and I'm director of a research center on heritage and society. We're doing work right now on migration and displacement issues, particularly related to climate change and landscape approaches to that. I've been sitting here thinking about the idea of emotional responses, emotional discussions of facts and science. And I think maybe the women in the audience will agree that there's a difference here in gender approaches to thinking about how we talk to people, to our own, to the academy, and also to the public. Women tend to be more emotional, and we've been told that that's been wrong for so many, many decades. But we have to get the emotion and passion back into the discussion of science. Otherwise, we're going to lose the argument because people respond to passion. And you can be about the facts and still be passionate and emotional about it because this is our future.
Thank you. Great comments and questions. We have time for one more round with the panel, so perhaps we can this time start on the right. And just turn to you for any final words and reflections, if we could be brief, because we only have about 10 minutes remaining. Wanjira, there were a couple of questions directed to you. One was on the quality of restoration as opposed to quantity, and another was on woody biomass, snake oil or not.
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, indeed, the quality, there's a lot of concern about the hiding of commercial interests behind this restoration. And that's why we're talking about the need to have a plan. Landscape restoration, an integrated approach to landscape restoration must involve a mosaic of restoration initiatives. There's one of the best that I've seen, again, has come out of Kenya, where you look at the restoration potential that includes the protection of indigenous forests that we know are extremely valuable. And so none of that restoration, especially of commercial plantations, is going on in those indigenous forest areas. Restoration along riverines with bamboo and other alternatives. I think the quality of the restoration will be guided by models that we have seen come out, for example, the Rome methodology that the World Resources Institute and IUCN have developed, and many others, that there must be a systematic methodological way of ascertaining what this plan is. And it must be a mosaic. It cannot be monocultures, because we know where that will take us. I think that's where I'd say, I wanted to respond to the question from the Member of Parliament from Uganda, and I think this is one of the biggest tragedies, especially of our part of the world. We see protected areas as land sitting there waiting to be used. I think the value that we place on our protected areas, our indigenous forests, is one of the most important things. And until we begin to value them for what they are, for the ecosystem services that they provide, they will be the victims of refugee settlements. I think any country in this world would be out of their mind to prioritize their parks, their green spaces, their open areas for settlements. But that's what we've been doing for many, many years. And we look forward to the day when our legislators will say no once and for all to protected areas being used for settlements, because that's not what they're for. They serve purposes much greater that would serve our refugees and the citizens of those countries, but they are certainly not to be cut down and used for settlements. I think the last question on the option for biomass for large-scale electrification, I think that was one of the issues that is, of course, a big question, especially with this dilemma of food versus fuel. We have to be very careful about how we scale up biomass-based electrification. But there are some great success stories, and I know that the World Agroforestry Institute is looking at opportunities. For example, one that I heard recently out of Sri Lanka and the Gliricidia, and the opportunities for agroforestry crops to be coppiced for energy, but at the same time serve as nitrogen fixing and then also as fodder for animals. I think we're going to have to look to examples like that, but restrain ourselves from moving into the food versus fuel area. So thank you.
Thank you, Wanjira. Hindu, there were many questions you may wish to comment on. There was one in particular on the link between security and landscape management. I wondered if you had any reflections on that or other points made.
Yeah, I mean, land is a source of conflict and also of security. I mean, I'm coming from the Sahel, I'm coming from the Chad countries, and really I understand when people talking about the migration, refugee, and land issues. Because when they are migrating, it's because of the land are grabbed, land are not anymore useful, and it's not restored, and we cannot use that. And this has become a source of conflict because we have this internal migration from one region to another one, not jumping to the sea and coming to the Europe. We know this is really very sad, but there is this internal tragedy that people are living from one place to another one, found in the natural resources, but it's not without price. The prices that they are paying is the conflict between the communities. And they are ready. Do you think they have choice? They don't have any choice, because it's for them survival. And everyone is ready for him survival to do everything that it's in power. So that's the conflict between the land and natural resources. And this is beyond the government discussions, because now it's becoming like transboundary issues. So they are not going deeply through it and see what is happening, why they are fighting, why we cannot just do a clear land management or landscape policies. They cannot do that because it's not easy. There is internal conflict. So I think what will be done, it's how people can see the effective sharing and management of the natural resources. I agree with my sister over there. We need to go back to our old system. Then the old system is just an example between the pastoralists and farmers. When it's the rain season, the farmers, it's cultivating. When it's dry season, the pastoralists come and put the cows there. And at the end of the season, the cow fertilize the land. So this management and sharing need to be taken back, because it's not writing anywhere. This is personal relation, and this can mitigate conflict, and with the emotion, as she said, alliance between women and man, marriage between communities can mitigate all this conflict into the natural resources. Thank you.
Thanks, Hindu. Matt, we sparked a conversation about science. I wonder if you want to share some thoughts or even emotions about that.
I knew I was going to get to this. You know, when I speak to my class, when I go visit elementary schools and high schools, you know, we're presenting facts, but they definitely know my perspective. And we talk about action. What actions can you take? It's really cute when I present, like, to a high school class. What can you do? You don't have to wait for a policy. What can you do to slow climate change? And they might, you know, throw a couple of things out. And I'll say the easiest thing is to stop eating beef. And the two vegetarian girls in the front row give each other high five. It's really awesome. It's really empowering. You know? Yeah, we're ahead of the game. And it's usually just, you know, two kids. But yeah, my perspective comes through very clearly. But I will say that on the data generation side, the idea of PROTUS, if there is any intimation that one side or the other, because you could bias data to look like the job is getting taken care of. In other words, you can push data one way to color it so that you know, the environment's passing the threat, or you could elevate it. And even if it's not true, if that is thought by the community, that there is a bias, there is some other impact other than just the technical or scientific basis for the number, you've lost the thread. So I try to stay clear of that. And I'm very happy that my role, I can empower groups like Greenpeace and other that can take it in an advocacy role. It's their role. And when I was at South Dakota State University, we had a project, Intact Forest Landscape, with Greenpeace. The vice president of whatever did not want Greenpeace logo on a South Dakota State website. You know, because they said, no, this is political activism, blah, blah, blah. It's not. And I'm like, okay, I'm in South Dakota. So the moment you know, even the perception is dangerous. So that's all I'm talking about in terms of the presentation of facts. We have something in the U.S. government, the General Accounting Office. It's supposed to be a neutral purveyor of what the effects of policy are on different sectors of our political system, economics, what have you. It's invaluable that people accept that as a neutral source of information. So that's
great. Thanks so much, Matt. Minister Maggi, there were many questions you may wish to comment on. In the interest of time, it would be great to ask you on one particular one, which was the question about short-termism and keeping your eye on the long run. And the question is, in a world where we seem increasingly wrapped up in reacting to immediate events, how in your role are you keeping your eye on the long run?
Eu gostaria de responder uma questão que veio aqui nessa direção, quando se falou na questão de como é que você pode trabalhar os ministérios, e entendi muito bem que é o Ministério do Meio Ambiente com relação ao Ministério da Agricultura. Gostaria de falar um pouquinho sobre isso.
Actually, I'd like to talk about what was said about ministries and how can, for example, the Ministry for Environment work with the Ministry for Agriculture, if you don't mind.
Nós no Brasil, nós não temos, e quando eu falei antes em questão de harmonia, foi levado para uma questão de harmonia diferente do contexto que eu falei. Mas em relação ao meio ambiente e agricultura, os da preservação e os agricultores no Brasil, nós não temos nesse momento um conflito que diga o seguinte, que haja contestação da legislação brasileira. A legislação brasileira é colocada, é clara, é respeitada por todos, aqueles que gostam ou aqueles que não gostam. E a relação entre o Ministério da Agricultura e o Ministério do Meio Ambiente, ela é muito transparente, ela é muito harmônica, se posso chamar assim, a ponto de nós sentarmos entre os dois ministérios e alinharmos as nossas atitudes com respeito a uma série de atividades, como, por exemplo, a nossa própria intenção aqui na COP22. Quer dizer, nós não temos essa disputa entre os dois ministérios no Brasil.
So I'd like to say, and I talked about the word harmony, and it was taken out of its context. So my idea was to talk about precisely this harmony between environment, agriculture, and the role of our farmers. There is no conflict regarding the laws that exist in Brazil at the moment. Everybody agreed to apply them. And I'd like to say that ministries in the area of environment and agriculture are working together in a transparent manner with harmony, with a common approach, and this is the common approach that we have brought here to the COP22.
Temos as nossas diferenças, temos na hora de fazermos os licenciamentos. Aí é uma questão de burocracia, uma questão de entendimento de legislação. Eu acho que deveria ser uma velocidade, o Ministério, os técnicos do Ministério do Meio Ambiente acham que deve ser uma outra, mas é uma questão interna nossa de burocracia, de entendimento, de legislação, de portarias, de normativas que nós precisamos internamente no Brasil resolver para sermos práticos e rápidos, sem perder a segurança daquilo que queremos fazer.
And of course there are differences specifically on some administrative matters, like for example certification, which is a pure bureaucratic problem. It's an interpretation question about rhythm. Some ministries want to do it with a rhythm, other ones agree with another rhythm. So it's a question of defining our own rules internally in Brazil.
E para finalizar, eu gostaria de dizer o seguinte, proteger o homem, proteger as populações, é dar alimentos a eles. Então, nós não podemos sacrificar a agricultura e prejudicar as populações sem alimentos. E, para mim, a agricultura faz parte da solução do problema que nós temos a discutir. Ela não é a vilã do aquecimento global que aí está.
And I'd like to say that to protect people, to protect our populations, it's very important to feed our populations. It's essential. So we should not sacrifice agriculture. Agriculture is part of the solution and is not the bad guy. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Bang Bang, over to you for last words.
Yeah. Okay, I think I will comment on two bigger things. The first about setting priority related to the environmental issue. I believe first of all, the Indonesian government is committed to reduce the greenhouse gas emission, that it has been part of the mainstream of our national development planning, at least for the medium term, 5 years planning, 2015-2019. It means any priorities that set up in the planning document has taken into account the environmental consideration and has taken into account the goal to reduce the greenhouse gas emission at least 26% by 2019. So I think it's quite clear when we are not trying to make the priority between environment and other than environment. What we are doing is we are taking the priorities of development already considered the mainstream of the greenhouse gas emission reduction, the poverty issue, as well as the growth issue. So I think all the priorities have taken all the consideration related to the environmental and of course the greenhouse gas emission reduction. Secondly, on the issue of the bioenergy, I think gentleman from Brazil asking about why I haven't included the wind, the solar panel, and etc. Basically, doesn't mean I haven't included, but what I'm trying to say, when we look the feasibility study of all renewable energy in Indonesia, the study showed, demonstrated that the three major potential renewable energy for the future of Indonesia would be geothermal, hydro, and bioenergy. Where are the wind, solar panel? Wind is coming after that. Wind energy, solar panel, as well as the current, the energy from the current. So, for example, wind energy. Of course, we have seen a lot of European countries using the wind energy. And we are trying to use the wind energy in Indonesia. There are some pilot projects for using wind energy. Unfortunately, the result is not yet optimal. Either the price is too high or the quality of the electricity generated is still relatively low. So it has something to do maybe with the climate issue, the different climate, different weather between Indonesia and let's say with the Western European countries. The other that we have tried actually is the solar panel. We are trying to use more solar panel for our remote islands in Indonesia, which is of course not part of the national grid. Well, so far again, the result has not been optimal in terms of the electricity production, in terms of the price of the electricity itself, and in terms of the battery capacity in order to provide the electricity for the evening when the sun is gone. So it means that we have taken into consideration all the types of renewable energy, but we are going to focus on the main three. Unfortunately, geothermal is very expensive, it's still risky, so that's why hydro and bioenergy became the main priority. A little bit about the biofuel. Actually, I envy Brazilian that has been able to mix bioethanol with your sugarcane. And I think Indonesia doesn't have, plenty of sugarcane production. We only have, crude palm oil, and we have been able to convert crude palm oil into the biofuel. So far now we have implemented the B20. For every liter of diesel fuel in Indonesia has been mixed with 20% coming from the biofuel. Regarding the issue of the palm oil, of course I don't want to discuss here, but from government side, we are trying to make our palm oil plantation more sustainable by first moratorium of the expansion of the palm oil plantation, and secondly by introducing basically the sustainable palm oil mechanism. And of course the other part of the issue related to palm oil that again I don't want to discuss here is basic competition with other vegetable oil everywhere in the world. I think it's common. It's just from economic point of view. But then we in Indonesia trying to make the palm oil management be more sustainable. And then of course I support other type of bioenergy including from bamboo. Bamboo is abundant in Indonesia, and so far we haven't utilized most of the bamboo chip in order to be a source of the bioenergy. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We're out of time, but let me actually, if I may, just take 1 minute to give a last word to Hajar, our MC and youth representative. This is your future we're talking about here. Any quick reflections on this?
Yeah, I've been sitting here for like 1 hour and trying to find out what would be my main takeaway from this whole session. And my main takeaway is that we are constantly acknowledging the existence of many challenges in finding the common ground when it comes to responding to different people's needs. We acknowledge the fact that small farmers in Indonesia cannot afford land so they can sustain themselves. We acknowledge that indigenous knowledge is not being used for a good purpose or is not being used at all. We acknowledge that gender issue, women are the first ones to go down when it comes to scarcity issues or conflict. We acknowledge that youth are constantly frustrated because they don't have jobs or because they just want to migrate, finding better future. And here we all agree, and one point is that even though these challenges are different, we agree to the fact that this is our earth that we live in, and this is our current fusion that we need to save, and we should remind ourselves constantly that we have a future children that will be living in this planet. And I think all of us can just go out of this session with one thing in mind, that we all care about this, even though the challenges and the needs are different. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hajar. So we're done. Let's thank our panel. You were a brilliant panel. I wish we could keep you together to solve many of the world's problems. So thank you.